The moment Judge Patricia Holloway walked into that courtroom, she stopped moving. Not because something startled her, not because the room was loud. The room was actually very quiet. She stopped because she recognized the name on the defense counsel placard sitting at the table directly across from my stepbrother's legal team. She read it twice. Then she looked up at me, and for just a second, her professional composure gave way to something that looked almost like surprise. Then she smiled. My stepbrother Marcus sat 2 tables away in a tailored navy suit, surrounded by 3 expensive attorneys his company had hired. He still hadn't noticed anything. He was busy whispering something to one of his lawyers and looking confident the way people look when they believe a situation is already decided. He had looked at me exactly that way for years, at family dinners, at holiday gatherings, at my father's birthday party 3 summers ago when he raised his glass and told the whole table I had bought my law degree from a website. Everyone laughed nervously. I smiled and asked for someone to pass the bread rolls. Because I already knew something Marcus didn't. The truth has a way of introducing itself eventually. You never have to force it. You just have to be patient enough to let it arrive on its own schedule. My name is Catherine Briggs. I'm 54 years old. For 26 years, I practiced federal litigation in Washington, D.C. Most of that time I spent handling cases that never made the newspapers. The ones that never made the newspapers are usually the ones that mattered most. My stepbrother never asked about any of that. My father remarried when I was 19. His name was Gerald Briggs. He was kind, steady, the sort of man who fixed things rather than complained about them. The woman he married, Sandra, was similar in most ways. Practical, warm, sensible. I liked her immediately. Her son Marcus was a different matter. Marcus was 22 when our parents married, already working in commercial real estate, already wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly rent, already carrying that particular energy some men develop when early success arrives before wisdom catches up with it. Confident isn't quite the right word for what Marcus was. Certain is closer. He was certain about everything, certain which restaurants mattered, certain which neighborhoods were worth considering, certain about people within approximately 90 seconds of meeting them. He was certain about me from the beginning. I was finishing my second year of law school when Gerald and Sandra got married. That meant I had no income, a shared apartment with 2 roommates, and a wardrobe my mother would have described charitably as practical. Marcus decided within one weekend what kind of person that made me. I could see it in the way he spoke to me, polite enough on the surface, faintly condescending underneath. The way people are when they believe they're being generous by tolerating your presence. He asked once what I planned to do with a law degree. I told him federal litigation. He laughed a little, not cruel exactly, just the kind of laugh reserved for charming impossibilities. Like a child saying they intend to become an astronaut. Sweet, but not serious. I let it go. I had studying to do. Years passed the way years do. Gerald and Sandra built a good marriage. Family holidays happened around their dining table. Marcus's real estate business grew. He purchased an expensive home in Northern Virginia, married a woman named Courtney who collected opinions the way others collect furniture, and generally expanded his life in the directions people expand when money arrives consistently. He also expanded his opinions about me. Over time, the jokes developed a sharper edge. At Thanksgiving one year, he asked in front of everyone whether I was still playing lawyer. I set down my fork, still practicing yes. He smiled, the same smile. Must be nice having a hobby that pays. His wife laughed. 2 cousins looked at the tablecloth. My father changed the subject quickly. I ate my turkey and thought about a deposition I had scheduled for Monday morning. There was the Christmas dinner where he told a family friend that I worked for some small firm doing, quote, whatever it is Catherine does. There was the 4th of July where he wondered aloud whether anyone had actually verified that my bar certification was current. He said it lightly, the way terrible things are always said, like a joke, like nothing. 3 relatives heard it clearly. I nodded once and walked toward the potato salad. The thing about people like Marcus is that they don't believe they're being cruel. They genuinely believe they're being honest. They've decided what you are, and the kindness they show is simply their willingness to keep inviting you dinner to dinner despite knowing. That's the story they carry. That's the one they keep telling. I never argued with it. I had learned something important early in my career. Arguments are for courtrooms. Silence is for every room where the truth hasn't arrived yet. I left the large firm in Washington after 20 years, not because I was asked to leave, because I was recruited. The federal judiciary had been watching a particular pattern of corporate misconduct cases develop across 3 states, and certain people in certain offices believed my experience with that specific intersection of real estate law and federal regulation made me useful. I became a special counsel working directly under the office of the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. My stepbrother's company operated primarily out of Northern Virginia. I want to be careful here, because the story of how Marcus's file eventually appeared connected to matters my office was reviewing is not a story about revenge. I didn't arrange it. I couldn't have arranged it, even if I wanted to. Federal cases don't arrive because someone wishes them into existence. They arrive because patterns accumulate until investigators notice them. And then documents follow the patterns, and then eventually a name appears in a case file that means something to the person reading it. Marcus's company had been under review for 14 months before his name appeared in my file. The allegations were not criminal in the dramatic sense. Nobody accused him of violence or fraud in the theatrical way people imagine. The concerns were quieter than that. A pattern of misrepresented property disclosures in commercial transactions. Contracts where language had been carefully constructed to protect the seller at the expense of buyers who trusted the representations being made. 14 months of documentation, 11 affected transactions, 3 states. The kind of case that takes years to build and approximately 45 minutes to unravel in a courtroom once you're ready. When the civil litigation connected to those transactions finally reached the stage where Marcus's company appeared as a named defendant, his attorneys presumably assumed they understood what they were walking into. A plaintiff's legal team from a mid-sized Richmond firm, a federal courtroom in Alexandria, a standard corporate defense with experienced counsel and adequate resources. Manageable. Nobody had told them who the plaintiff's lead counsel was. That was not an accident. My name on the case had been a matter of public record for anyone willing to look. Marcus's attorneys had apparently not looked. And Marcus himself had not mentioned to anyone that he possessed a stepsister who practiced federal litigation, probably because he had spent 20 years explaining to people that she wasn't particularly serious about it. I arrived early the morning of preliminary motions. I prefer arriving early. Courtrooms feel different before they fill, quieter, more honest somehow. Like a room before the performance starts, when the space still belongs to itself. I was reviewing notes at the plaintiff's table when Marcus entered with his legal team. He was speaking to one of his attorneys and didn't look toward my side of the room immediately. Then Courtney, who had come to watch, said something quietly and touched his arm. He looked up. For a moment, his expression didn't change, just confusion. The kind of confusion that arrives when a face appears somewhere it doesn't belong. Then he read the placard. Catherine Briggs, attorney of record, plaintiff's counsel. I watched the confusion move through several stages in approximately 4 seconds. Then he leaned toward his lead attorney and said something. The attorney glanced at me, then back at Marcus. His expression became careful. I returned to my notes. Judge Patricia Holloway entered shortly after. I had appeared before her twice in the previous 6 years. She was precise, patient, deeply fair, and possessed the particular quality the best federal judges share. She remembered everything. She took her seat, surveyed the courtroom, and her eyes reached the plaintiff's table. She stopped. "Good morning," she said. Her voice carried the same measured quality it always did. Then, directly to me, Ms. Briggs. "It's been a while." The plaintiff's team greeted her. I nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. About 3 years." She moved on immediately. Efficient, professional. But the damage, if you want to call it that, was already accomplished. Across the room, Marcus sat very still. His lead attorney requested a brief recess almost immediately after preliminary matters opened. The judge granted 15 minutes. During that recess, I walked toward the water fountain near the corridor when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around immediately. I already knew. Catherine. His voice sounded different than I'd ever heard it. Something had left it. The certainty was gone. I turned. Marcus stood a few feet away, no attorneys beside him, which told me the conversation he wanted to have wasn't something he'd cleared with counsel first. He looked like a man who had just discovered a floor he trusted wasn't there. "You practice federal litigation," he said. It didn't sound like a question, more like a sentence he was testing for the first time to see if it felt real. I've been practicing federal litigation for 26 years, yes. His jaw tightened slightly. You never said. You never asked. That answer sat between us for a long moment. The corridor hummed quietly. Someone's walked past carrying a stack of folders. Life continued in all directions. Finally, he said, "Are you going to destroy my company?" It came out almost raw. The polish had completely disappeared. I looked at him carefully. "My job is to represent my clients," I said. "What happens next depends entirely on the facts, not on me." He nodded slowly. I don't think he expected that answer. People who assume others carry grudges tend to be surprised when they don't. The recess ended. We returned to the courtroom. The day proceeded the way federal litigation days proceed, carefully, methodically, without drama. Evidence speaks loudly enough on its own without any help from raised voices. The case settled 4 months later. I'm not able to discuss the specific terms. What I can say is that the outcome reflected the facts as the facts existed, nothing more and nothing less. That's how it should work. That's how I've always believed it should work. What happened afterward surprised me more than anything in the courtroom. About 6 weeks after the settlement, Marcus called my father's house on a Sunday evening. Gerald mentioned it later that week. Said Marcus had asked for my phone number. I gave Gerald my permission to share it, though I spent a quiet moment sitting with the uncertainty of that decision. Marcus called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing documents when my phone rang. He spoke carefully at first, measured, like someone who had rehearsed the words and then decided halfway through to set the rehearsed version aside. He said he owed me an apology. Not one apology. Years of them. I didn't interrupt. He said he had decided early on that I wasn't serious. That somewhere in his mind, a woman who dressed simply and didn't talk about herself much couldn't be doing anything that truly mattered. He said he heard himself saying those things over the years, and he had thought he was being honest. He understood now that he had been something else entirely. There was a long pause. I asked him one question. Why did it take 20 years? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you never proved me wrong. You just let me keep being wrong. I didn't know what to do with someone who wasn't fighting." That answer told me more about Marcus than 20 years of family dinners had. People who are accustomed to winning arguments don't always know what to do with someone who simply refuses to have one. The silence looked like weakness because he needed it to look that way. If I had been weak, the story he was telling made sense. But the story was never true, and on some level, he had always known it. Silence, it turns out, is not the same as surrender. It just requires patience most people never bother to develop. My father called me after Marcus spoke with him. Gerald is 71 now and still fixes things rather than complaining about them. He said he had watched the dynamic between Marcus and me for 2 decades and had regretted not saying something sooner. I told him there was nothing to regret. Some lessons need enough space to breathe. He laughed softly. "You sound like your grandmother." I took that as the highest possible compliment. The next family gathering was Gerald and Sandra's anniversary dinner in October. Small, quiet, just family around a table with good food and the kind of conversation that happens when people aren't performing for each other. Marcus was there. We didn't pretend 20 years hadn't happened, but we also didn't carry them into every sentence the way we once had. At one point, he asked me about a case he'd read about in the Virginia legal news, something involving a complicated real estate question at the federal level. He wanted to understand what the court had actually decided and why, so I explained it to him. He listened, not the polite half-listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak. He actually listened, asked a follow-up question, considered the answer before responding. It lasted maybe 15 minutes. An ordinary conversation about something I'd spent my career understanding, nothing dramatic, no ceremony. No apologies exchanged across a formal table, just two people finally deciding to see each other clearly. I've spent 26 years watching people surprise each other in courtrooms. The meek plaintiff who knows the contract language better than the corporate attorneys across from her. The quiet defendant who turns out to have documentation nobody anticipated. The witness who seems forgettable until she speaks. Courtrooms are full of hidden histories, full of people who were underestimated right up until the moment they weren't. Most of the time, the people who prepared in silence outlast the people who performed in public, every time. If someone in your life has decided what you are before learning who you are, I'd encourage you to resist the urge to prove them wrong loudly. Quiet preparation outlasts loud assumptions, it always has. And the truth, when it finally arrives on its own terms, tends to land far more effectively than anything you could have arranged yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it reminded you of someone in your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories about patience, dignity, and the kind of quiet justice that doesn't require an audience, I hope you'll come back.